Point 2, the empty tomb. After 3 days, Jesus' tomb was empty. Today, nobody knows for sure where Jesus' tomb was because it was never enshrined. Nobody bought kitten cards, flowers, little windmills because he wasn't there. Even his opponents agreed the tomb was empty and guessed maybe the body was stolen, even though all of the valuables were left inside the tomb. And what's weirder still is they eventually found the body walking around eating dinner.
Our earliest reference to the idea that Jesus' tomb was found empty could possibly be in Paul, but that's reading a lot of information in it. Because Paul says that it was only according to the scriptures that he knew that Jesus was buried and then resurrected. He doesn't say anything about an empty tomb. So any talk about an empty tomb is coming from the Gospels. And so that's not going to work for us because the Gospels are not representative of history. Paul is a better representation of history than the Gospels are. And like I said, Paul only ever got his information from scriptures or from visions of Jesus. Really what you have here is just visions and scriptures that are telling you that Jesus was resurrected, or that somehow inferring that the tomb was empty when Paul doesn't even tell us that there was a tomb to begin with. He just says that he was buried. That could have been in an unmarked grave. We don't know. All right, number 3, what you got?
So that's point 3, the fish dinner. The reports of Jesus' resurrection weren't metaphors like he rose in our hearts, nor were they spooky ghost stories like Jesus got buried in an ancient burial ground at full moon and came back as the walking dead. No, Jesus actually rose physically and fully from the dead. He visited friends, told them he wasn't a ghost, ate fish, and got doubters like Thomas to touch his scars.
See, the fact that you talk about touching his scars and then you touch your hand shows me that you don't really know anything about like the Roman version of crucifixion, because he wouldn't have had holes in his hands, dipshit. He would have had holes in his wrists. And the whole doubting Thomas thing only ever comes from the gospel, specifically the Gospel of John, which is 2nd century gospel to begin with. And so he had all the other gospels in which to work from. But even then, Thomas was like fingering his little side hole and not exactly touching his hand wound, I guess. Or at least that's how he's generally depicted. I don't know. I guess he could have fingered his hole, all of his holes, however you want to take that. But it's also very important to understand that Paul, as well as the other Jewish Christians at the time, felt that the celestial realm was a physical place that you could go. That's why in the Old Testament they tried to build that Tower of Babel up to the celestial plane where God supposedly resides. So being that the celestial realm was a physical place, as well as like hell or Sheol or the Jewish version of Hades, that place was also a physical place that you could go to too, but nobody wanted to go there. Fuck that place. They all wanted to get to the celestial realm, which was just above the firmament. And so being that that's the case, of course, Paul would have thought that Jesus was a spiritual body that was still physical in some kind of way. So Jesus was resurrected, but it was this future resurrection body. The same body that Adam had and that our future resurrection bodies will be. And those would be bodies that are specifically made for the person and not the original bodies. Or at least that's what Paul says. All right, what's the next piece of evidence?
Number 4, the instant press. Jesus' resurrection wasn't some myth that developed slowly over hundreds of years. News spread immediately in the same towns and time as the events. If it blatantly wasn't true, this would never have spread. Instead, as more people actually saw Jesus, news spread like wildfire.
So this one's kind of curious because generally the time frame in which the Messiah of the Jews, like that myth or legend, developed, they generally want to put that as happening like right after Jesus died. The problem is that they have their time frames wrong, because the actual time frame for the development of the Messiah myth comes way before that point. The Messiah myth was actually developed in the Old Testament, and so it did have several hundreds, if not thousands of years in order for it to develop, and it culminated in the 1st century. They had this whole idea that the Messiah was to come and absolve them of their sins and save them and bring peace and all this other stuff. That's the thing that God in the Old Testament had always talked about doing. They expected it to come because of some prophecies in the Old Testament, which weren't exactly prophecies as originally meant by the author of it, but it was reinterpreted by later Jews to mean something else. And it eventually culminated in the first century with Jesus was supposed to come, or, well, actually specifically Jesus, because they actually named Jesus in the Old Testament. They give this Messiah a name, Jesus, but he actually has a lot of names. As if anybody's read Philo of Alexandria, you know that there's a lot of different names that Jesus goes by. The Logos, the Word, an Archangel, like that. There's a lot of different ideas about like Jesus' name, but you get my point. The myth about the Messiah had thousands of years to develop, so you're just completely wrong about this point.